So we're reiterating what we did in the double, or discussed in the double this week 10 of term 1, regarding our deconstruction of the novel 1984, and specifically concerning ourselves with that at this point. As I said, our other text comes into play soon. Now, part 3 starts with Winston having been arrested, and he is now sitting essentially in this waiting room to be interrogated, and little does he know, of course, that he will be not just interrogated, but in fact tortured. And as he's sitting there waiting, there's this endless stream of other prisoners going off to room 101. Every single one is sent to room 101. This is what they're asked to do. This is Orwell suggesting to us, of course, there's nothing very special about Winston. This is just an ordinary, everyday occurrence. Winston's just another in the chain of prisoners. But the most important thing is this moment here. These boots that we hear turn out to be O'Brien's. And that's the game that's being played by Orwell. He is tricking us. He is taking our sense of trust in the protagonist's judgment, in Winston's judgment, because in a novel, that is what we end up doing. We trust the protagonist. We're given the chance to know their innermost thoughts and feelings, and so we establish a connection with them. And that built trust, therefore, is set up to give us payoffs in the last part of the novel. And even if the novel gives us some bad news, and this one gives us some terrible news, but if a novel gives us some bad news, often we don't lose trust in the protagonist. We fall as the protagonist falls, but we stay pure like the protagonist does. But here, the mistake has been made on Winston's part. O'Brien, the door opened and O'Brien came in. The shock of the sight had driven all caution from him. For the first time in many years, he forgot the presence of the telescreen. They got you, and they got me a long time ago, O'Brien says. And O'Brien is the one who's going to interrogate him. You know this, Winston. Don't deceive yourself. You have always known it. Now that line is key, because that line is reminding us and reminding Winston that we should have seen this coming. We have been told since the get-go that language is something that we can't trust. Language is a manipulation. Language does not necessarily mean truth, because in the world of 1984, doublespeak, newspeak, and the manipulation of language in history is how this world works. And do we think for a second that we understood exactly what's going on in the world of 1984? Did we trust Winston? Of course not. So what Orwell's saying is, got you too, reader. Caught you out. You thought you were reading a novel. You thought you knew what the rules were. You've read Dickens before, and you've read all the great 19th and early 20th century novels. Well, this is not going to be the way it works at this moment. And so we get a chance to really stop and think about it. But unfortunately for Winston, he doesn't. He immediately is given overwhelming pain. Pain to the point, as you can see here, that it is everything. It completely encompasses him. And so pain this time, as opposed to language, stops his train of thought. The light cleared and he could see them, and the guard was laughing at his contortions. Everything has exploded into yellow light. Everything. The word everything is there. This is not just someone tapping him on the shoulder or even just breaking his arm. This is pain that causes him to forget himself. Forget everything that he knows. Winston is then given constant pain with great and alarming regularity. This torture is just being done to him. This torture is not being done to elicit any information from him. This torture is to let him know that he is not in control and never has been in control, not even in control of the ability to control pain. Everything is controlled. Eventually, as it says here, the beatings grow less frequent and he starts to get interrogated. The threat of pain is what keeps it working. One of the more fearful things that happens early on in O'Brien's interrogation, once O'Brien starts to become the key figure in this, and it's here where Winston, or at least we realise that O'Brien is the everything in this situation, so he might as well be Big Brother. O'Brien gives him this line, "Don't worry, you are in my keeping. For 7 years I have watched over you. Now that turning point has come, I shall save you. I shall make you perfect. We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness. in that other dream 7 years ago. O'Brien seems to even know what Winston's thinking and dreaming, and it suggests, therefore, the surveillance is an absolute omnipresence. It is not just watching you, it knows your thoughts, hence thought crime. Okay? And then we finally get this conversation between Winston and O'Brien and what things are and what things are meant to be. He has the great threat of pain, extraordinary threat of pain, and then he begins on that threat. Okay, I'm taking trouble with Winston because you are worth trouble. You know perfectly well what is the matter with you. You have known it for years, though you have fought against knowledge. You are mentally deranged. You suffer from a defective memory. You are unable to remember real events, and you persuade yourself that you remember other events which never happened. Fortunately, that is curable. You have never cured yourself of it because you did not choose to. There was a small effort of will that you're not ready to make. Even now, I'm well aware you are clinging to your disease under the impression that it is a virtue. Now we will take one example, and he talks about Oceania and Eurasia and the history of war. And it's interesting because he places that element of doubt in Winston's mind, and the element of doubt, therefore, in our mind as a reader, that perhaps Winston has been mistaken. Perhaps his world of 1984 is constant and perennial, and the wool that's been pulled over his eyes about the past is the same one that's been pulled over our eyes. There is a mental derangement that the world he lives in is under the control of a recent past. And what O'Brien is suggesting, that's defective, that's incorrect. In some societies, nostalgia is seen as a disease, as a mental illness, and this is the important issue with it. To go further, as the interrogation develops and they start getting into a debate about memory, O'Brien lets Winston know that he is in fact insane, because what he says here is, how can you control memory? You could not control mine, as in, if we control the past, we control memories, we control everything. And O'Brien says, on the contrary, this is what brought you here. You're here because you failed in your self-discipline and your humility. You would not make the act of submission, which is the price of sanity. You preferred to be a lunatic, a minority of one. Only the disciplined mind can see reality, Winston. You believe that reality is something objective, external, existing in its own right. You also believe that the nature of reality is self-evident. When you delude yourself into thinking that you see something, you assume that everyone else sees the same as you. And this, of course, is how it works. Nobody can actually entirely, completely, and in philosophical terms prove that what you see is what everyone else sees. So therefore, only what Big Brother says must be true, has to be true, for you to be sane, for you to be safe and sane. It actually is, therefore, this utopia hiding inside of a dystopia, which is the irony of the whole circumstance of the book. We get down to this little simple idea that Big Brother says, how many fingers am I holding up? And you answer with how many he says. With the 4 fingers, and O'Brien holds up 5 and gives him pain until he answers, and eventually Winston answers 5. No, Winston, that is no use. You're lying. You still think there are 4. How many fingers? 4, 5, 4, anything you like. Stop the pain. Abruptly, he was sitting on O'Brien's arm around his shoulders, and it goes on. So it's not about answering because of pain, the threat of pain. It's answering because you know you've got to train your mind to think differently. After the interrogation continues, you see this incredible moment here where Winston is so frustrated, so flummoxed, he actually doesn't know how many fingers there are. And O'Brien says, better. That means as soon as he's not aware of what his own mind tells him, he can allow his mind to be told to think by someone else, and that is how this works. And you get this really clever part here, because people ask, and it's a fair question to ask, is what Winston asks, why not just kill me? Why torture me? If I'm a problem, why not just kill me? And he's failed to see what was pointed out before, that revolution starts with martyrdom. In fact, as you know, religion starts with martyrdom. And so to do that would be the worst thing. So O'Brien says, basically, if you're a flaw in the pattern, we have to fix you. And once we fix you and you are fixed of your own free will, it proves we were correct. And that, in the end, gives us absolutely no hope Hope is completely disappeared and gone. The only thing now he has left is his care and love for Julia, and we know that that's going to be something that fails pretty soon. And then you get the terrifying manifesto. Okay, the removal of family. Here we have it here. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth, and as eggs are taken from a hen. The sex instinct will therefore be eradicated. It will be a formality. There will be no love except for love of Big Brother. There will be no laughter except laugh of triumph, and it goes on. And then we get this image. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. And what that essentially means is not just people being tortured. It means that the human condition will always be under the control and will of those who are in power and those who run power. That's the terrifying thing. We can only exist in a reality that we have conceived for ourselves according to the design of this book. That's where true horror lies. This, of course, leads us to this bastion of last hope and false hope. I have not betrayed Julia. And the peculiar reverence for O'Brien, which nothing seemed to destroy, flooded Wilson's heart. How intelligent, he thought, how intelligent. Never did O'Brien fail to understand what was said to him. Anyone else on earth had answered promptly that he had betrayed Julia. But of course, O'Brien said, no, he had not. It's perfectly true. You have not. And so you've got a little bit of hope. You know that if he stays true to that, then perhaps we have an opportunity. This is before he goes into room 101. This is before he goes in to face those rats. And finally, when he is in room 101, this horror becomes real. And once the full reality and horror of these rats come along, we get this line here. Do it to Julia, not me, Julia. Betrayal. And that betrayal is it. That's the end. That concludes the destruction of hope at that moment. He betrays her. And then we get this final chapter where Winston is back out in society and he is an agent and lover of Big Brother.